Thank you. I'm Rita Dunaway. I live in Harrisonburg, and I am the Virginia Legislative Liaison for Convention of States. I'm also one of the 2 staff counsel on the national team. And my question, Dr. Long, is, as you know, under Article 5, the Congress sits in what we could describe as a perpetual convention for proposing amendments. It has the same power as a convention of states to propose whatever amendments it wants, and more than that, it's not even limited to whatever subject matter state legislatures might limit themselves to in their applications. So my question, something I've never really understood about the position of those like yourself, is why is it that you seem to have so much fear about what would happen if we let the state legislatures use their Article 5 authority to propose amendments? Why are you so fearful of that, but apparently not fearful of Congress's power?
Do you realize that I and every other person in this country fear the Congress as much as you fear a convention of states? Because we already see it happening. They don't need to amend the Constitution to do what they're doing. They simply reinterpret it. We have been having reinterpretation of our Constitution to the luxury of those in Congress and appointed officials since the Constitution was written. They don't have to amend it. I don't fear them amending it, Dr. Dunaway. I fear their ill behavior. And because I feel their ill behavior, I know they're going to do the same bloody thing no matter how many amendments you put.
I would like to say, first of all, that I must congratulate both sides of the argument, or the people who stood for them, because they both are right to a certain extent. But my question is a little different, and I couldn't possibly answer these most recent ones that have come up. My question is, how can we get Virginians or Texans or Minnesotans or any other state to agree not to take more federal dollars? If we could do that, our problems would be solved.
I don't know whether you'll ever get them to agree to do it. I wrote several little short essays, one-pagers, that I sent to members of the House, members of the Senate. I've gotten back letters, not emails, letters about it, wanting to think about it and talk about it more. Unfortunately, we have a good old boy called Emmett Hannah, who sort of thinks we should take $2 billion per year for money for Medicaid. So we're going to have a hard time convincing some of these dudes not to take the money. But unless you get up and push it down their bloody throats, they're going to do what they want to do. That's all I know, Margaret. And I spend a lot of time pushing it down their bloody throats not to do it.
I was really do a rebuttal, but I wanted to address the court issue that you had raised at the very end. And that is, when I was speaking, I said that there was some precedent that the Supreme Court upheld a decision that the U.S. couldn't change rules midstream. So I wasn't saying that I was going to rely on the courts to take care of a convention of states if there was a problem, except to say that if in a convention of states there was some runaway something that happened, or they decided to change the rules of engagement, we have legal precedent with the Supreme Court saying you can't do that. And that happened with the Equal Rights Amendment. Okay?
As far as calling for a convention of states, and Ed is saying that the federal government is the only one that's going to have the power to do that. I obviously disagree, and I think if you think about it from a common sense point of view, and you do your own research, you'll see that Virginia called for the Philadelphia Convention. But that didn't mean that Virginia could tell the other state who their delegates were going to be, or who their commissioners were going to be, or what that particular state was going to talk about. So if you think about it, there you go. I mean, Article 5, Ed read it, I read it. Article 5 gives us, we the people, the power to go around an oppressive government. It gives us that power. And it does not have the power to dictate to us what we will discuss. And the reason that I think that this is so important is because, again, the federal government is not going to hand over power to you. It isn't going to do it. It's going to continue to tell you what to do, where to go, and everything else. You have to go around it. I do not believe, Ed disagrees, that the Article 5 is in the hands of the federal government. You have to prove that to yourself. And I invite you to prove it, because I think if you read, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, I don't know the detail, I can't sit up here and have this debate necessarily, because, again, not a constitutional attorney, but there are far superior minds than mine that have been having this debate, and I totally agree with Mike Ferris. And I totally agree with a lot of those constitutional attorneys that believe that we can control it with this subject matter.
Cindy, I wasn't rebutting your particular statement about the Supreme Court. I was rebutting a more general idea that people say the Supreme Court has said there can be such thing as a constitution of states, and the Supreme Court gives us the states a voice. And I thought it interesting that that kind of thing would be said simply because the Supreme Court has no voice in Article 5, whereas Congress does have voice because it's there. And yet we want to say Congress has no voice. But Congress is that portion of the government that has voice. No, ma'am, I disagree very emphatically. And here's the reason I do about an Articles of Convention of States. Let me repeat to you. Under the Articles of Confederation, the states were completely sovereign, except for just a couple of little things. But Congress, federal government really had no voice. States could do what they did. No, Virginia didn't tell other states what to do. They met, they commonly agreed, because the states had the sovereignty to do it. That ceased when you had the Constitution of the United States because of Article 6. We were no longer, the laws of the states were no longer supreme. The supremacy came within the Constitution, and there is only one, read it, folks, it's simple English. Congress calls the convention. Any other questions?
We have a problem in this country. Basically, is this thing on? Okay. Basically, because who do we trust? Do we trust the federal government? Do we trust our state government? The federal government dangles a carrot, and the state runs around like a rabbit trying to grab it. And where does that leave us? We, the people, are supposed to be the ones to be able to do something about the problems in the country. Yet we have been unable to do it. We have talked about this convention of states, but yet George Soros is a big financier behind a lot of it. Yes. Michael Ferris. He is the author of the Parental Rights Amendment, which delegates power over children to the federal and state governments. Do we want that? there are so many people that are involved in the progressive movement that's backing this convention of states that it's unbelievable. Now, if anybody wants this information, I've got 2 booklets saved on my computer. And if anybody wants it, give me your email address and I'd be glad to forward them to you. And I don't think I have enough paper to print it all.
My question is very simple, and it's directed to you or anybody else. What is the initiative alternative to the Convention of the States? If I would I'm going to coin it the Long Amendment that got through the legislature. Would a national initiative to balance the Convention of the States argument get traction?
If you paid any attention, and I'm sure you did, Harold, I know you. What I wrote called for a convention of states. I have looked at so much of what Madison has said in letters. I've looked at what others have said in letters of the time. I read Madison's notes on the convention. I read the letters that prospective commissioners, delegates, whatever you want to call them, to that convention, how they talk to one another. And I looked at when they really got into the meat of an Article 5. It wasn't called Article 5, I think it was Article 26 or something originally. I don't remember the number at this time. But it went through a whole lot of renumberings as the number, 3 or 4 days. I look at Article 5, and I have the same question that Madison had about what do you mean by a convention? And I don't know for the life of me why it got through as vague as it did. And that's what, look, I don't think that what the language that I drafted, which we put together, Delegate Landis and I did, and it got through the House, I don't think it'll get through the Senate. But I look at that language and I say, look, you better structure Article 5 so that it's well defined enough to prevent what a legitimate host of people believe is a problem with an Article 5 convention. I don't care what you call it at this time. Convention of States, Amendment Convention, Constitutional Convention, Article 5 Convention. I don't care what you call it. It is as vague as bloody heaven. And I would like to see it defined more cleanly. I would like to see it restrained so it didn't take the passion of time that came along with something like an amendment to prevent you from drinking. I don't want to see that kind of passion of stupidity and just irrational exuberance, as one person called it not too many years ago when it came to things about our budget. I don't want to see that happen. I want to have it have structure. Do I believe if that even got out of the Senate, it would go anywhere? Because the way it's worded is it will be given to the congressional representatives who go to from Virginia, who go to Congress, for them to present it to Congress to be considered. Do I believe that the other states would do that? I don't know. But maybe they ought to start thinking.
Things before I ask my question. This word fearful, what are you afraid of, really bothers me. Because if we oppose this, we're made to look afraid. That's not true. This isn't the only answer. We're also presented only 2 choices. We either have a convention of states, or we let the federal government run over us. Those are not our only 2 choices. Constitutional scholars, yes, there are constitutional scholars on the side of the Convention of States. However, there are plenty of constitutional scholars on the other side. They are blasting Phyllis Schlafly. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's a stalwart conservative. But because she doesn't agree with those constitutional scholars, suddenly she is stupid and fearful and whatever terms they're using My question is, I hear the Convention of States, let's propose these amendments. We can't get our government to adhere to the Constitution and amendments we have. How will you get them to do this?
I think that's a very, very good question, because it's something that I thought of myself, and one of the problems that I think that we have. What I've been able to research is that the language of any amendments that occurred later on, like i.e. after the 10th, has very, very specific language in it. And you don't see anybody really, what are the words? I'm at a loss. Yeah, there's not really been challenges to those later amendments. The challenges are the first, the second, those types of things, where the language was broad. I just want to remind you that in the old days, in the 1700s, when all this was going on, there was a lot of precedent. These people had convention after convention after convention. They knew the rules. They're very, very comfortable with them. Today, we don't know what those rules are because we haven't studied them. We didn't live during those times, but they are there, and they are in our history, and they set the precedent. So you can't say that we have no clue, that we have no idea how a convention will go forward, because we do. All we have to do is go back to that history and see how things went, and that's exactly the way that they would go in the future. And I would also like to address one other point, and this is the point that you brought up. When I hear conservatives talk about Phyllis Schlafly, the conservatives I hear talk never badmouth her. They admire her for what she is and what she does and how, what her stands are. They just disagree with her. I never hear them badmouth her. Now, maybe that's because I listen to good conservatives. I don't know. But I also agree. Just because you don't agree with someone doesn't mean you badmouth them. And I would never badmouth Phyllis Schlafly. And like I said, I've never heard anybody badmouth her.
I have a question.
While she's coming up, I will tell you that there's one participant, and I'm not saying this to negate convention of states, but I will tell you there was one participant in a very public venue who is a very big, strong advocate of the Convention of States, who said, poor old Phyllis, she's old, she's lost track of things. She doesn't know what it is today with this new thinking.
Hi everybody, my name's Mary Beth, and most of you all know me. My favorite boss that I ever had was a Marine, and he said, if you bring up a problem and you don't follow it with a solution, you're fired. And I love working like that, so I think that we should look for solutions. We've heard the one solution, and Dr. Long, I think you touched on a solution. I think you mentioned a referendum, but I would like to ask you if this isn't a good solution to rein in the Leviathan that we are all here and very concerned about, do you have a really good solution for us we the people, to get behind?
I met for about 30 minutes at Dr. Ferris's request at lunch, and he walked away from me and said, I've got my solution, have you got yours? Yeah, I do. I'm going to tell you why I don't care for the venue given to the description of Convention of States, as it's described by Dr. Ferris.
What's your solution, though?
I'm going to give it to you.
All right, thank you.
I don't agree with the Convention of States as proposed by Dr. Ferris because he wants to go into a meeting saying there's a general problem in the federal government. It's too big, it spends too much, and we're going to write all these amendments to make it behave itself. I don't like the idea of letting a group of people go into a room and write a whole host of amendments to my Constitution. I don't care for that. It's dangerous. My solution is, and I described it to you, as 2 ways, 2 points. One was get a hold on state spending of federal money. When you put the carrot out in front of somebody and say, there's the carrot, go for it. What does a horse do? He'll drive himself to death going for the carrot. But he's using the harness and being controlled by the driver in the wagon. And that's what the federal government does to us. It puts the carrot up there, the carrot, you eat the carrot, and you wear the harness. What is this core with the education thing?
Common Core.
Common Core. We took money for our teachers, our school system, etc. Common Core is going to come back to haunt you because they're going to use the fact that they gave you the money and now they're going to try to insist that you listen to Common Core. The government is going to find dangle money out there to people, and we've got a whole host of people who will take that money. We got people begging for the $2.2 billion per year for the Commonwealth of Virginia for Medicaid. And once the government gives Virginia that money, do you think the federal government's going to just sit there and say, "Oops, you got it, you do what you want, we're going to have a word to say about it"? No. So I gave you 2 things. I said, let the states grow up, man up, and stop taking money. The minute you stop taking money from you, I have no way of telling you what to do. But if I can give you money for lollipops and chocolate, boy, I'm in control of what you do. The second thing I said is combine that with a referendum. Now, I know there's problems with referendums because both sides can put out referendums. You can have referendums you don't like. But I know referendums have taken place in 3 states, 4 referendums against the federal government, and they've held their place. The federal government hasn't challenged them. And yes, I've talked to a lot of delegates about it within the Commonwealth of Virginia in the House. Some of them are for it, some of them against it. But I think it's worth thinking about. That's my alternative. And I don't think that's any weaker than sending a group of people to amend my Constitution.
Are you proposing a specific referendum? I'm not with you.
I'll give you an example of a referendum. Federal government, take your Common Core and do with it as you wish in a dark place. We don't want it. Take your Obamacare and don't bother us with it. And don't take the money. The people say we don't want it. I guarantee you that if enough people say they don't want it, the federal government won't be able to do it. They'll try to push it. But there's enough going on that says that you can really, if you want to stand together, express yourself, stand strong, you can win. My only concern, as Rick and I were talking earlier, we may be past the point of return, period, on anything. Amendments or anything, period. I have to survive, and I really don't think my state government, my federal government's going to do much for me. But I'm considered a radical for that, so I'll shut up on that subject. Any more questions?
Sorry, don't worry about it.
I'm intrigued with the idea, to some degree, about having federation states, etc. But what really gets me about the convention of states, you know, even when we had 13 states, you remember the arguments they had just trying to get along. And then I look, you know, and I know it's nonpartisan, but you look at a map during the time where we have elections and how much blue and how much red. I really don't think 38 states can be in a convention and get along. I just think they're so different. I don't know if that can come together, that's all. Do you think it can?
That's my question.
Do I think 38 states can get along? I don't know if 2 people can get along. I think if there's a convention of states and it's called for a specific subject, and that is to limit the power of government, the jurisdiction of the federal government, I think they are there for a purpose. And I think they'll hammer out the details. And unlike Ed, I know there's a lot of people out there that we're not too impressed with in terms of their abilities, in terms of political savvy or knowledge of history or anything like that. But there are a lot of people out there that are very well educated and very sophisticated in this field. And don't forget, those people will have input in this process. You know, we can't just say that all the George Washingtons were of yesteryear. There's some very, very intelligent, much more intelligent than I am, people out there in our society. And I think we have to give them credit, and I think that we have to hold on to that. Because if we don't, we're lost. If we don't try to do something, we will lose the civil society. If we lose the civil society, and I've got my guns, you've got yours, but we could be dead in a minute. I mean, seriously, this is what we're trying to do. Article 5 gives us an opportunity to civilly and legally go around the federal government. And I believe that we can, and I believe that we should try, because if not now, when?
The only thing I'd add to that is if you're going to follow the Constitution, you're not going to go around the federal government. Read Article 5. It doesn't give you a license to go around the federal government. That's all I will say.
I understand, Dr. Long, that you don't care for Article 5 in our Constitution.
I don't care for the way it's worded and its statements, ma'am.
Yes, but it is the provision that the founding fathers gave us to confront the very situation that we are in today, where the federal government is abusing its power. I know you've read the convention debates, so I know you know that that's why this provision is in there, to allow the state legislatures to sit in the driver's seat of this process. If you read the convention debates, that's what you get from it clearly. So my question is there any scenario you could envision when the situation in our country would be so bad, the federal government would be so far out of control, that you would think it would be worth it for us to try to use the tools that the founders gave us to correct it?
I don't disagree with an Article 5. I don't disagree with having the opportunity to change the Constitution. I disagree with the extent at any one time you would go about changing the Constitution. And no, I don't like it, but there's nothing in Article 5 that says the states have a voice other than to petition for a convention. And at the time there was a convention of states, there was no government to offer opposition to it because it was under the Articles of Confederation. There was no Article 6. There was no supremacy clause. There was no status of a government that had lordship, domain, over the states. It is embedded in the Constitution that they did because Madison saw to it, because Madison was concerned that there wasn't a supremacy form above the states to hold that bunch of ruckus 13 in some order. No, I don't disagree with an Article 5. I don't disagree with my Constitution. I do disagree with reading the Constitution in Article 5, a convention being a convention of states. You had one. No, ma'am. You had it under Articles. No, you had it under Articles of Confederation, a convention of states. There is nothing. You can't give me. If you tell me that your courts are going to describe it or some expert to describe it, I'm sorry. Tonight we said that Dr. Ferris is a supreme, intelligent knowledge of the Constitution. And no, there are people of his stature and more that would disagree emphatically with him. There is no constitution of states unless the Congress says, yeah, you can, convention of states, unless the Congress says in Article 5, we'll call a convention and we'll let the states put it together. There is none. You can go back in history and say, oh yes, there was a convention of states. I agree with you, it was a convention of states. But at that moment, the Constitution didn't exist. They were writing the bloody thing. They even wrote in the last article. What's the last article in the Constitution say? I'll tell you what it says. It says 9 states can approve this Constitution. It wasn't even law or in effect at the time, but something that hadn't even been passed was going to be the statement of what it took to pass it. Articles of Confederation said all 13 had to approve it, and that's the only basis you had at the time.
Wait, was that a no? Was that a no? There's no point that you would ever agree with trying this option. Was that a no or a yes?
I disagree with a convention that says, I'm going to do something to change my federal government, and I'm going to write a bunch of amendments. That's what I disagree with. I have told you, I would change Article 5 first, and give it a definition. At that point, when you've given a clear definition, go with it. That's my answer, yes, with the ambiguity taken out.
You know, everybody has been so fantastic in terms of listening to this back and forth. And it's a very, very important subject, and it's very appropriate to be thinking about it today. Obviously, you have to make up your own mind, do your own research. As you know, Ed and I disagree on the reading of Article 5, so do constitutional scholars, so you have to make up your mind. I've made up my mind based on what I've read, and I have read a lot of the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers and the articles, the convention notes and things like that. I haven't read everything, and I certainly don't know everything. My point is, what is my point? My point is, it's been a long night. And, I know what I wanted to say. When I was doing the research about the Articles of Confederation becoming the Constitution, what I discovered, and again, you're going to have to do your own research and see, but what I discovered is that it's very commonplace for names of bills and laws to change. That is in the title. It has nothing to do with the body. It doesn't mean that just because we had all of these amendments to the Articles of Confederation, it doesn't mean it's not what it was designed to do. They went there, they did what they were supposed to do. They took that back. They took all of the amendments, and there were a lot. But there was no cap on the number of amendments. They didn't have instructions that said you can only have 1 amendment, 2 amendments, 3 amendments, 4 amendments, 5. There was no cap. They took all of these amendments. They strengthened them. It became the Constitution. They renamed it. They took it back to Congress and said, here's what we came up with. What do you think? And Congress said, fine. And we're going to, they also agreed to change the 13 to 9. And the states, if you go further in your reading and your history, you'll see that the states also agreed to that procedural change. That was a change in procedure that was agreed to by all 13 states, even though 2 of the states, Rhode Island and North Carolina, said we don't want the Constitution. They still agreed to the procedural change to go from 13 votes to 9. So again, you have to look at it. You have to decide, how are we going to fix the federal Leviathan? Because I think it's not fixable. We have to go around it.
It's the Constitution, 9 states versus 13. Congress was, they found a way around Congress on that, on the Articles of Confederation, and found a way to take it to the states to have it ratified by 9. Congress was not necessarily in agreement with that. Listen, I have about a list of 13 or 14 different major pieces of work that I will share with you if you'll send me an email. It has the email addresses of it. You'll be able to look up where all of Madison's writings are. You'll look up Farrad's papers. You'll look up anything related to here, and some of the most innocuous little things that you can think of that I've collected over the years from reading. If you want a copy of that, I can give it to you, and you don't even have to chase on the web where to find stuff. Eventually, you're going to want to buy the hard-bound volumes of these things. And you're going to want to live with them and treasure them. Bill?
This will be the last question.
This won't take but a minute, and I've just been sitting back there chewing on it. We know that we can't trust scoundrels in Congress. We certainly can't trust a scoundrel in the White House. They don't seem to care about the Constitution. The president sure doesn't. We can't trust the courts because we can have an election and the court will overturn it. Every time the Democrats lose something, they just go to the court and they find some judge that can. So this lady would like us to have this convention. Why on earth would we just assume or believe that we can trust turning that over to a bunch of guys, and just a new bunch of scoundrels? And she says, well, these are highly educated people. There's a lot of highly educated people in Washington that are making all these rules that are screwing up the country. So my question is real simple. Who the devil do we trust, or why should we trust any of these scoundrels to fix this mess? The only one person in this room I can think of that I completely trust and respect their opinion is this guy.
I'll tell Landis what you said, Bill. I'm not sure he'd agree with that.